And one thing that's talked about a lot as far as calories in, calories out goes is this idea of energy balance. They consider those things as the same thing because calories are equated with energy. And this is one of the biggest issues with the calories in, calories out equation
Well,
is that calories do not equal energy as far as our bodies are concerned, as far as physiological energy goes. So a calorie is it's a measure of heat energy, and when we're talking about calories from foods, it's the equivalent amount of heat that gets produced if you were to combust the food, if you were to burn the food, and our bodies
I
don't do
think to
that.
raise one some certain amount of water by 1 degree Celsius. I think it's like 1 milliliter of water by one
Yeah,
degree Celsius. Something
yeah,
something
it is.
something like that.
Yeah, and so you're saying that's what a calorie is, and so that's like
Exactly, which is it's very abstracted. You know, it's not like our bodies sit there and burn food to increase temperature.
right, right. There are a
You don't
ton of
actually
fact.
literally burn it.
Yeah, yeah. That's not. Yeah, we don't just have a furnace and you just take the food and shovel it into this furnace and measure the heat energy that comes out. Our bodies don't run on energy like that. So in reality, calories are related to, but have very little to do with energy balance. They're measures of potential energy, but there's a ton of factors that go into whether the potential energy in those calories actually is used as energy in the body. And so in talking about some of those, so just to clarify also, when we talk about energy balance, we're talking about the actual energy. So you can consider that in terms of ATP. It does go beyond that, but the point being that we're talking about the actual physiological energy that our bodies are using as far as energy balance goes,
And
not
producing some food that
right,
actually
right,
it's not the idea of the calories. It's if that food can be converted into the energy and then the subsequent energy that is created from the conversion. It's
right,
not just this random number of calories,
right.
which doesn't really tell you anything. I mean, I want 1,000 calories of watermelon or I want 1,000 calories of alcohol. Like, is it going to be the same thing? No, definitely not.
Right.
100% not the same thing.
Yeah, they have drastic differences in our bodies physiologically. They do not result in the same amount of energy produced, and there's a bunch of different factors there. So one of those, which were one of the first factors, is digestion and absorption. So of course, the amount that you take in is not necessarily, we may or may not digest it well and absorb it well, which would determine how many calories are calories, how much potential energy is potentially even absorbed into our bodies. So
Yeah.
that's one factor. We aren't going to go through all of them, but just to kind of name a few, that would be one. There's a lot of other studies showing that differences in macronutrients, whether you're having a lot of carbs or a lot of fat or a lot of protein, affect the calories in, calories out equation, where people will see different amounts of weight gain or loss, body fat gain or loss, depending on the different macronutrient ratios. The same goes for even the types of foods that those macronutrients are coming from. So for like a certain type of protein, for example, there's studies showing a comparison between wheat protein and whey protein, where just changing the type of protein affected how much body fat was stored versus how much muscle was created. And there's a ton of other factors as well that affect these. So you had mentioned hormones obviously being a major factor here that determine how much energy we're producing from the food that we create, and sleep would
And
be
where that energy is directed to. I think that's really important as well. Because, like, say for example, if you have an elevation of cortisol or you have an elevation of androgens or progestogens or thyroid hormone, when you have the androgens are going to be anabolic. So the food that you're going to take in, if you're in a very androgenic environment, will be shunted more towards developing the body, whereas cortisol in and of itself, which is more catabolic, and it's not necessarily if you're in a high cortisol state, you may not really be having a lot of energy at your disposal. That is largely what the cortisol is showing, or it's an inflammatory state. You may be directing the energy that you are taking in towards developing belly fat. It's very directly. I mean, this is, if anyone looks up anything like Cushing syndrome, you can see the different profiles. So if you want to see the different effects of the different hormones, and the hormones are messengers of the state, they're indicative of what the state is as well.
Mhm.
But if you take somebody, you want to see what androgens do, look at a bodybuilder to some extent, see somebody who's injecting large amounts of androgens. Or if you want to see the effects of what cortisol does, take a look at somebody who's using dexamethasone or prednisone, which are synthetic corticosteroids, or somebody who has Cushing syndromes, which is an excess of cortisol. And you can see an increase in belly fat, central adiposity, so a lot of visceral fat, which is what the belly fat is, insulin resistance, hyperlipidemia, so an increase of triglycerides and cholesterol, dark circles under the eyes, fat disposition in different specific areas of the body, and then like a wasting away of the skin and stuff like that, and a decrease in muscle tissue. Whereas if you have an androgenic profile, you see an increase in musculature, and you see a slimming of the waist, or a very slimming of the waist, and an anabolic effect on bones and things like that. So they're almost opposite of each other to some extent on the metabolic spectrum. So I think it's a really important. I mean, those things like that will show you where the differences are, and those things aren't purely calories in, calories out. I mean, there's way more to it than just that. And I think the hormones have more of a play in what's going on, and the effects of the different foods and stuff have more of a play of what's going on than abstracted concepts like calories and protein and carbs and fats. There's much more to them than just that. They're almost like distractors from what really goes on with food in the body. And they are helpful for research. They're helpful to break things down, to study things in like actual research studies, but to like when you're breaking things into specific variables and then trying to single out those variables, you want to break it into protein, you want to break it into this, but then you'll see that, as you said, with different proteins have different effects. So it really starts to come down to the foods themselves. And I think that's where it becomes more important. And you start to, the more you get involved in that, the more you start to see that the calories in, calories out it's not even, I don't even think it's really that hopeful, besides saying just getting an idea of quantities of food. It's such an abstracted concept. It doesn't even make any sense. Like, somebody to sit there and still promote this whole idea of calories in and calories out as the be all to end all means a lack of looking into the effects of different foods and the effects of hormonal profile and things like that. Like, it's so abstracted that it's not even reality. Like, you cannot measure food in calories. Like, I'm sure gasoline has a caloric value.
It does, yeah.
So, like, that, I don't think that, what would you do if you drank a bunch of gasoline? You wouldn't be burning it.
You wouldn't get fat either.
No, you wouldn't get that. So it's abstraction, it's distraction, besides looking at quantities of food. And I think that the paradigm, like when you really break it down and look at it, it just doesn't make any sense. And I think that this underlying paradigm is what's causing a lot of issues for a lot of people and distracting them from really looking at what's going on.
Yeah. Yeah. And I've written an article that dives pretty extensively into some of the details here as far as the research goes, and as far as all these different points of evidence that go against this calories in, calories out idea. So I'll link to that because I don't want to spend too much more time digging into all the details. But the main points being that there are all these different things that affect that determine. Okay, so calories are a helpful indicator of how much you're eating, but there are a lot of different things that determine. Basically, there's a lot of differences between the calories you take in and the calories that actually reach our cells and where they reach and everything like that. There's also a lot of different factors that affect the calories out, if you want to think of it that way, basically how much energy we're producing or expending. And so that includes the types of foods, as you mentioned, different macronutrients. It includes hormones, which are affected by everything from sleep to sunlight to also the amount of calories that come in. So that's one of the biggest factors here, is that our bodies adapt to what's coming in. So we are not simple machines where we, kind of just have this, and we don't run on a certain equation. We don't have like this mechanical process where, we just take whatever's coming in like a conveyor belt and it just becomes whatever, it's supposed to become based on the certain equations in place. Instead, it's adaptive. We adapt to the amount of food that we take in and the types of foods that we take in, which all affect how much energy we produce, how much food we store as fat, and what we do, how much energy we expend, also just as far as activity goes. So there's one idea called metabolic adaptation, which just shows that when we eat more, our bodies use more energy, and when we eat less, our bodies use less energy. And then there's also behavioral compensation, which is that when we eat more, we're more likely to expend that energy voluntarily. And when we eat less, we're less likely to expend that energy voluntarily. So that means that if you eat more, you might be fidgeting more, you might be more likely to walk around, you might be more likely to move and exercise. Whereas if you eat less, the opposite is the case. So all of these different factors are affected by how much we're eating, and really, which all just flies in the face of calories in, calories out.